Is the Resident Evil 2 remake better than the Resident Evil 3 remake? Well, if you've been up to date with the gaming world's news despite most of the world being on lockdown, you'll probably know that the Resident Evil 3 remake is out and good to go, if you're of course interested in playing it. While some people might find it understandably iffy to play a game about a pandemic in the middle of the pandemic, there are other fans that have been waiting decades for this game to come out, and now it is the time. However, how does it compare when put side by side with the Resident Evil 2 remake from the last year? Let's begin talking about the Resident Evil 2 remake first. The survival horror game is the remake of the 1998 game Resident Evil 2, released for Windows, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One on January 25, 2019. In this game, players control a rookie police officer, Leon S. Kennedy, and student Claire Redfield, and similar to previous installments, they attempt to escape Raccoon City during a zombie apocalypse. So despite its release date being pretty much last year, it turns out that this remake has been in development since a long time ago. Capcom wanted to remake a Resident Evil 2 after the first Resident Evil was remade in 2002, though this was delayed for several dates until finally it was announced in August 2015. The game was generally acclaimed and very successful, with praise for its presentation, gameplay and faithfulness to the original. It was nominated for several awards, including numerous Game of the Year awards. By December 2019, it has sold over 5.8 million copies, outselling the original. So yes, you can figure out that this game had to be kind of a good if it was successful and acclaimed by different critics. I'll break down a quick overview of the game. Unlike the original, which uses tank controls and fixed camera angles, the remake features over-the-shoulder third-person shooter gameplay similar to the Resident Evil 4. Additionally, the standard difficulty mode also allows players to save as often as they would like inside the save rooms. If the player chooses to play on a hardcore difficulty, players will be required to collect and use a finite number of ink ribbons to save the game's progress, much like in the original game. The game is set in Raccoon City in September 1998, 2 months after the events of the Resident Evil. Most of the citizens have been turned into mindless creatures, referred to as, well, zombies, due to the outbreak of a viral bioweapon known as the T-virus, manufactured by the Umbrella Corporation. We will talk about some reviews of the game and compare it to the expectations of the Resident Evil 3 remake, released on the April 4th, 2020. First of all, and to be sure, the tension is much higher in Resident Evil 3. There's a lot more emphasis on horror, a relentless villain, and a protagonist who seem more helpless than actually useful. There's certain lots of actions here. It seems like Jill is beyond capable of defending herself, much like the original 2 titles. The 2020 Resident Evil 3 retains many assets from its prequel game, as they were built within the same game's engine. Resident Evil 2 is a more radical remake than the most. It's an intense, terrifying experience that rebuilds the game from scratch and doesn't at all feel out of the place on a high-end modern hardware. Even the very atmosphere of the game is a lot of the action that forces you to face fear that can be even just over your shoulder or right behind you. Similar to the Resident Evil 7, items are scarce and death could be behind every door you open. The fact that the game plays so effortlessly makes it all the more stressful when you can't find a single bullet anywhere. This game has a very basic design, although it doesn't feel old or outdated at all. It was enough retro charm that caused many players to lovingly enjoy what was once the first experience of survival horror in the history of the gaming. It's still incredibly tense to plot your route through the environment, making bets with yourself as to how many shotgun shells you'll need or how many bites of the neck you'll be able to survive. The game keeps you on your toes, with yourself asking questions on if you're going to be able to survive or what is going to happen in the next corner. This is the very essence of the Resident Evil 2 game. Moving on to the history. The script here is better than the originals, which is delivered in the extraordinary voice acting. Unlike the Resident Evil 3 remake, this game has many paths and additional puzzles. It's compact and linear to be sure, but when compared to the side-by-side with the Resident Evil 3 remake, it can be much less streamlined. Playing through once only gives you half the story. However, after you completed the campaign as Leon or Claire, you can play a second version of the game with the other characters, where a significant amount of the content is completely different and items have been moved around. As you will see later, this is the important point that the Resident Evil 2 has over the Resident Evil 3. The second one has a very high level of the replayability that adds to the gameplay and story, while the third one is a bit more for the speedrunners or people who want to finish the game fast once more, to break their records or perhaps for the challenges too. For the Resident Evil 2, you will want to replay it even more than twice. Moving up to the Resident Evil 3, original players of the game will find their nostalgia senses bombarded with so many original characters coming back. Resident Evil 3 sees return of the original Resident Evil protagonist Jill Valentine in a story that plays out at the same time at the Resident Evil 2, as Jill tries to escape the Raccoon City. Now Resident Evil 3 begins with a situation that, well, doesn't seem to be similar to one that we're currently living in, might hit home in some areas of the world, with a live action footage of the citizens rioting and looting during the pandemic. If you feel stressed by the COVID-19, then Resident Evil 3 is not the game for you. It will hit home and it will hit hard, and neither is the second one for that matter. Comparing the two main spaces, the setting of the Raccoon City Police Department in the Resident Evil 2 is atmospheric, claustrophobically narrow, and overall creepy in the nature. Meanwhile, the sprawling Raccoon City streets of the Resident Evil 3 are wider and more liberating. There are a lot of heavy emphasis on the tension of both the games, although by far Nemesis is much tougher and a scarier villain. In a series story, the Nemesis T-Type is the result of the infection a T-103 model Tyrant, a humanoid bioweapon created by the ultimate life form with the Nemesis Alpha parasite. Upon the infection, the parasite takes control of the Tyrant's nervous system, forming its own brain, enabling it to follow precise instructions and make decisions without needing for constant direction. Nemesis' very appearance is as unsettling, beside being a completely abnormal being, how he's overpowering his size and the face. He's also coated in a black clothing, an overcoat, boots and gloves. On top of it all, he's armed with a rocket launcher mounted on his left arm. The parasite also gives Nemesis an extremely powerful regenerative abilities, which results in being impervious to the damage, which is another reason why Jill seems completely helpless against the Nemesis. Despite this, the introduction of the dodge mechanic in Resident Evil 3 makes Jill seem much more capable than our previous protagonist. Resident Evil 3 opts to keep the gameplay a bit more streamlined this time around, relying far less on puzzles and the exploration than its predecessor. Resident Evil 2 leans into the puzzle solving, storage maintenance, and ammo saving playstyle it was known for during the original PlayStation trilogy. Resident Evil 3 favors the gunning and fast action of the Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. At the end of the day, my final verdict is definitely that the Resident Evil 2 remake is a better game. It stays to the core of the original games and balances puzzles, actions, and suspense in one formula, while Resident Evil 3 is a quicker action-paced destruction while also suffering from a short runtime. Anyway, don't forget to give this video a like if you have enjoyed it and share it with your Resident Evil fans, and also subscribe for more great video game content like today's video. Lastly, I've got a Patreon. With your support with just $1, you can make these big videos possible. Please be sure to take a look at least, and since they actually include also extra rewards as well. And Ravenstar, again, thank you for the continued support. Truly appreciate it. Well, at that, thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.